Okay, we're beginning section 15.3, continuing with our statistics chapter. So we're going to look at two examples where there are 10 test scores. Now, if you look at the first one, there are 5 zeros and 5 100s. So if we find the average, if we add them all together, we get 500. There are 10 scores, so that would give us an average of 50. If we wanted to find the median or the middle, that would be right here would be the middle, so we would have to average together those two scores in the middle. So 0 plus 100 divided by 2, and that would also give us 50. Now if we compare that to the second example, this is 10 scores and they're all 50. So since all the scores are the same, we know the average and the median would be 50. So if all we're looking at is average and median, these two data sets would be considered identical, but we can tell that they're actually really different. So one thing we can look at is how spread out the data is. And one way to do that is to look at the range. And for the range, you just take the maximum value and you subtract the minimum value. So for the first data set, our highest score was 100 and our lowest score was 0. So we have a range of 100 points from the lowest to the highest score. But for the second data set, we have 50 for the highest score and 50 for the lowest score. So the range helps us see how spread out the data is. Now the range is most useful if we don't have any outliers. So an outlier would be a very small or large number that doesn't really fit in with the rest of our data. So sometimes we use what's called the interquartile range. And this is going to be quartile 3 minus quartile 1. So if you remember in the last section, we learned how to find the quartiles. So if we look at our next example, if this one looks familiar, we did this one in the last section. So let's go ahead and put our data in order from least to greatest. And I'm going to go ahead and find all of my quartiles real quick. All right, so let's see. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm going to start with the median. So the median would be right here. So that would be our median, also known as Q2. So that would be 3. It'd be the number halfway between 2 and 4. So then if I wanted to find Q1, I look at the bottom half of the data and I find its middle. So this would be Q1. That would be halfway between -3 and -5. So I'm going to write that down here. Q1 is going to be -4. Now if I look at the upper half of my data and find the middle of that, that's going to give me Q3. So Q3 is going to be halfway between 7 and 8, so it's going to be 7.5. All right, so now I'm ready to find the range and the interquartile range. So remember the range is max minus min. So my maximum value is 8. My minimum is -6. So you have to be a little careful. This will be 8 minus -6. That becomes 8 plus 6, or 14. So there's 14 points between the lowest score and the highest score. Then the IQR is the interquartile range. That's going to be Q3 minus Q1. So 7.5 minus -4, that becomes 7.5 plus 4, and that gives us 11.5. Okay, so the purpose of the interquartile range is, remember when we did our box plot, the box went from Q1 to Q3, and that's where half of our data is. So the IQR tells us how spread out the middle half of the data is. Now we mentioned this idea of outliers, that if we have outliers we want to look at the interquartile range. So next we're going to look at how we calculate outliers. So we have a formula for the lower limit. We're going to do Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. For the upper limit we're going to do Q3 plus 1.5 times the IQR. So what we're doing is we're taking our box plot, and if our whisker is more than 1.5 times the length of the box, that indicates an outlier. So this is mathematically how we figure out outliers. So if we look at this first example, We have the distribution of heights of 18-year-old males, and we're given Q1 and we're given Q3. So we want to figure out what heights would correspond with outliers. Okay, so we're going to do let's find our IQR first because we're going to need it for our formula. The IQR is Q3 minus Q1. Q3 is 71. Q1 is 67. So that gives us an IQR of 4. All right, so our lower limit is going to be Q1 minus 1.5 times the IQR. Well, we know that Q1 is 67, and we're going to minus 1.5 times 4. And if you put that in your calculator, that comes out to be 61. Now the upper limit is Q3. Notice there's a plus instead of a minus. 1.5 times the IQR. So Q3 is 71 plus 1.5 times 4, and that comes out 77. So we have our lower limit and our upper limit. So what that means is that heights that are less than 61 inches, okay, because that's our lower limit. So we don't want to go any lower than 61. And then we also don't want to go any higher than 77. So we'll say heights that are less than 61 inches or greater than 77 inches are outliers.